This is Shaft, and we have the iconic score from Isaac Hayes. Just what a way to start the film. And there's a lot of fun dialogue. Got a lot of great lines.
There was a time when Hollywood believed Shaft would fail. Not because the movie wasn't good, but because almost nobody thought audiences were ready for it. They were wrong, and what followed was a chain of unexpected moments that transformed a modest detective film into a cultural phenomenon and changed the future of American cinema in ways few people saw coming. What nearly stopped Shaft before it ever reached theaters, and which unbelievable stories have been hiding behind this classic for more than 50 years? Join us as we uncover 15 insane facts you never knew about Shaft. Number 15. The original Shaft was white. Let's start right there, because if this one doesn't get your attention, nothing will. John Shaft, the man who would not cop out when there was danger all about, was originally written as a white character. Ernest Tidyman, the journalist who created Shaft in his 1970 detective novel, conceived John Shaft as a white character. The novel's original conception was built around a white detective. MGM bought the rights to the novel. Then Gordon Parks got involved, looked at the existing conception and said no, absolutely not. Not on his watch and not on his set. He insisted the role be recast as a black man, and he went looking for one. The studio resisted, but Gordon didn't move. And that decision, that single act of creative insistence, changed the entire film and produced one of the most iconic characters in cinema history. And speaking of Gordon Parks, who exactly was this man, and why did his entire biography make this movie almost miraculous? Number 14. The self-taught photographer who had never made an action film. Gordon Parks was 59 years old when he directed Shaft. He was born into poverty in Fort Scott, Kansas in 1912, the youngest of 15 children, and taught himself photography with a $4 camera he bought secondhand. From those origins, he went on to become the first African-American photographer ever to work for Life magazine, the first to shoot for Vogue, and the first to shoot for Glamour. He documented Harlem gang life, Paris fashion, the Black Panther movement, and New York high society with equal virtuosity. The Black Panthers liked his work so much, they offered him a job as their Minister of Information, but he declined. Gordon also gave himself a small role in the film as an apartment landlord, so keep your eyes open for him. But his presence behind the camera was far more important than anything he did in front of it, and he almost didn't get to use that camera in New York at all. Number 13. MGM tried to move the entire film to Los Angeles hours before filming started. Here's the one that makes you want to throw something. Gordon Parks showed up ready to begin filming in New York City on January 3, 1971. He had his locations, his cast and crew, and was hours away from calling action on his first shot. And then MGM called. The studio wanted him to pack everything up and move the production to Los Angeles. Budget concerns, they said. It would be cheaper to shoot on studio lots and LA backlots than to film on location in the actual streets of New York. Gordon recalled in his autobiography, Voices in the Mirror, that the call came with essentially no warning and was delivered with the casual brutality that studio executives reserve for moments when they know they are about to cause maximum disruption. However, Gordon refused. Shaft was a New York story. It was about the energy of New York in 1971, the grit of 42nd Street, the particular swagger of Harlem, and the way the city itself pushed back against anyone who tried to move through it. MGM eventually backed down, and that decision to insist on New York City as the irreplaceable setting is one of the most important creative choices in the film's history, because the city is as much a character as any of the actors. Locking in, New York gave the film its soul, but it still needed the right face to carry it. So who was the little-known newcomer who beat out dozens of hopefuls for the role? Number 12. The model who almost nobody had heard of. When Gordon started looking for his John Shaft, he was not browsing a list of established black film stars. There were vanishingly few of those in 1971 Hollywood. What he was doing was essentially a talent search, and he found his man through a cattle call, a large open audition where dozens of actors show up and take their shot. Richard Roundtree was 28 years old, had dropped out at 21 to pursue modeling and acting. and had eventually joined New York's Negro Ensemble Company, a prestigious training ground for black theatrical talent, where he'd played Jack Johnson in The Great White Hope. He had appeared in exactly one film before Shaft, a minor 1970 comedy called What Do You Say to a Naked Lady, in which his role was negligible. He was also working as a cab driver between acting jobs. It was Gordon's own son, David, who told his father to look at Richard. Gordon went to see him, saw something in the way he carried himself, and cast him on the strength of that physical presence and the charisma that radiated off him even in a room where nothing was happening. Richard later said with complete sincerity, "Gordon Parks is Shaft." The director saw the character in the actor before the actor fully saw it in himself. But what happened to Richard Roundtree off-screen decades later is one of the most remarkable and least discussed parts of his story. Number 11. The star battled a threat. This one requires a moment. Richard Roundtree, the man who defined masculine cool for an entire generation, the leather jacket, the strut, and the absolute refusal to take any nonsense from anyone on any street in any city, was diagnosed with breast cancer in September 1993 at age 51.
So when he returned to Los Angeles, he saw his doctor.
He said, "Richard, you have breast cancer."
He found the lump himself in the shower, a lima bean-sized mass under his left nipple. He attributed it initially to the gynecomastia he had experienced as a teenager, and wasn't particularly alarmed. His doctor delivered the diagnosis, and Richard underwent a double mastectomy and 6 months of chemotherapy. He kept it completely private for almost 5 years because he was terrified, not of the cancer, but of what it would do to his career. He went into remission, and then, at a celebrity golf benefit in South Carolina in the late 1990s, he made a spontaneous decision that changed the conversation around male breast cancer in America. He stood up in that room and told the crowd what he had been through. He also became an ambassador for Susan G. Komen for the cure. The advocate outlasted the disease that had tried to silence him. And now here's the story of the music that made the whole movie iconic, which almost went in a completely different direction. Number 10. Isaac Hayes unsuccessful. Audition. Isaac Hayes wanted to be John Shaft. He was 29 years old, bald, enormous, and radiating an energy that could fill a stadium. He was, in many ways, a plausible Shaft on paper. Gordon considered him, but did not cast him. What happened next turned rejection into one of the most important musical moments in cinema history. Gordon liked Isaac enough to ask him about doing the score instead, and Isaac agreed. The theme hit number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 for 2 weeks. In November 1971, the soundtrack became a double album that went platinum. And then came the Oscars, and a moment that nobody in that auditorium was quite prepared for. Number 9. Isaac Hayes made history. The 44th Academy Awards ceremony in 1972 was historic for multiple reasons simultaneously. It was the first ceremony hosted by a black presenter. Sammy Davis Jr. was one of 4 co-hosts, alongside Helen Hayes, Alan King, and Jack Lemmon. And before the night was over, Isaac Hayes made history that went far beyond winning Best Original Song for the theme from Shaft. When Hayes won, he became the first African American ever to win the Oscar for Best Original Song.
Again, they said make it short. Everybody that was involved in motion picture, I thank you.
Hayes walked away with a historic Oscar, but the film's greatest achievement wasn't on the awards stage. How did Shaft become the movie MGM desperately needed, and why do many credit it with saving the studio? Number 8. The film that saved the studio. MGM in 1971 was not in good shape. The studio that had given the world Gone with the Wind, The Wizard of Oz, and Singin' in the Rain was hemorrhaging money. The old studio system had collapsed, and the new management was trying to figure out what MGM even was in the modern era, and the answer was not obviously apparent from the financial statements. Shaft was one of only 3 profitable MGM productions that entire year. The phrase "saved MGM from bankruptcy" gets attached to Shaft regularly, and it is not technically precise. MGM continued to have significant financial difficulties after 1971. But what is precisely accurate is that Shaft provided the studio with the kind of cash infusion and proof of concept that delayed the worst outcomes and kept the lights on. Saving a studio was one thing, but the story behind Shaft's creation revealed another layer entirely. Who was making the biggest creative decisions, and why does that reality still surprise so many fans? Number 7. The film was written and produced largely by white men. Here is the uncomfortable tension at the center of Shaft that the film's own success tends to obscure. The novel was written by a white man. The screenplay was written by a white man. The executive producers were white, and MGM, which owned and distributed the film, was a white-controlled institution. Gordon Parks was the director. Richard Roundtree was the star. Isaac Hayes composed the music. Editor Hugh A. Robertson was black, but the commercial and creative infrastructure was substantially white. This tension was noticed immediately. A New York Times piece from July 1971, just weeks after the film's release, asked directly whether Shaft was a black movie for white audiences. Clayton Riley, the author of that piece, was pointing at something real, that the machinery of exploitation runs on someone else's image being packaged and sold by people who may not fully share the experience being depicted. Gordon Parks was clear-eyed about this. He was making a film within a studio system that had specific commercial interests. He fought for what he could fight for and accepted that other aspects of the production infrastructure were what they were. The making of Shaft wasn't defined only by the decisions made on set. Some of its greatest magic happened in the recording studio, almost by accident. So how did Charles "Skip" Pitts create one of the most iconic guitar riffs ever recorded? Number 6. The rehearsal riff that became history. Guitarist Charles "Skip" Pitts showed up to the Stax sessions not knowing he was about to record one of the most recognizable instrumental hooks in popular music. He had his wah-wah pedal. He had a riff he'd been noodling around with. When Isaac laid out the structure of the opening theme and the rhythm section kicked in with Willie Hall's skittering hi-hat keeping time like a fuse burning, Pitts started playing. The wah-wah guitar didn't emerge from careful planning or multiple takes trying to find the right sound. It slithered into the mix as naturally as if it had always been there, as if the music had been waiting for exactly this sound and finally found it. Isaac recognized immediately that what Pitts was doing was the essence of the character. The rehearsal riff became the recording became the song became the opening of one of the most iconic sequences in film history. That guitar riff also made Skip Pitts famous in the way that session musicians rarely get to be famous. His contribution is identifiable within the first 2 seconds of the track, which is a distinction almost no guitarist in history can claim. The first few seconds of Isaac Hayes' theme became instantly iconic. Yet there was another moment that almost never happened at all. So how did the opening scene of Shaft come within inches of being left out? Number 5. The almost omitted opening scene. The opening of Shaft is one of the most discussed sequences in 1970s cinema. The camera descending toward 42nd Street, Isaac's theme rising on the soundtrack, and then Richard emerging and walking through Times Square, dodging a taxi, giving the driver the finger without breaking stride, and somehow making even that gesture look like the height of cool. That walk was not simply Richard Roundtree doing what came naturally. Gordon Parks, with his photographer's eye, understood that the opening shot had to immediately communicate everything the film was about. Cinematographer Urs Furrer captured it all on location in actual Times Square, with actual 1971 foot traffic flowing around them. There were no controlled sets or extras paid to walk in specific patterns. Real New York responding to a camera crew filming a man in a leather jacket walking with absolutely extraordinary conviction. The result was the kind of spontaneous documentary energy that you cannot manufacture on a controlled set, and Gordon knew that from 50 years of photographing the real world. Gordon Parks used the real streets of New York to give Shaft an authenticity audiences had rarely seen before. The film's impact, however, reached far beyond Times Square. So how did one movie reshape an entire genre of American cinema? Number 4. The film launched the blaxploitation genre. American cinema was never the same after Shaft. The film proved, with $13 million in evidence, that there was a massive audience for films centered on black characters in action genre stories. Hollywood, which had been systematically ignoring this audience for the entirety of its existence, looked at those numbers and immediately started trying to replicate them. What followed was an explosion of films made quickly, cheaply, and with varying degrees of authenticity, featuring black protagonists in crime, action, and drama settings. Superfly came out in 1972, directed by Gordon Parks, Jr., the director's own son.
And all those black folks you keep doing so much talking about get guns and come back ready to go down, and I'll be right down front killing Whitey.
Coffee, Foxy Brown, Cleopatra Jones, Blackula, dozens of films in the first 3 years after Shaft, hundreds over the course of the decade. The genre was branded blaxploitation, a portmanteau that implied the films were exploiting black culture and black audiences rather than genuinely serving them. Gordon Parks could not stand the term. He felt it dismissed legitimate creative work and reduced a cultural movement to a commercial category defined by its critics rather than its participants. He was particularly protective of Shaft, specifically, which he had made with genuine artistic intent and genuine love for the city and the community it depicted. Being placed in a category defined by the word exploitation felt to him like exactly the kind of reductive labeling that black creative work had always been subjected to. The debate about blaxploitation, whether it was empowering or exploitative, whether it expanded black representation or merely created a new set of stereotypes to replace the old ones, ran through the 1970s and has never been fully resolved. Whether Shaft empowered audiences or reinforced new stereotypes remains a conversation that continues to this day. One thing, however, is beyond dispute. John Shaft became one of the coolest characters ever put on screen. But who inspired the look that made him so iconic? Number 3. Gordon Parks' own personal style. One of the less discussed creative decisions in the film is where John Shaft's distinctive look actually came from. The leather jacket, the turtleneck sweater, the plaid suits, the trimmed mustache, the total package urban cool that made Richard look like the best-dressed man in any room he ever entered. That was Gordon Parks' wardrobe, or more precisely, it was Gordon aesthetic sensibility projected onto his protagonist. Gordon was himself an extraordinarily well-dressed man, elegant and considered, specific about his clothing, in the way that people who grew up without means sometimes become, when they finally have the resources to dress exactly as they want. The Shaft look was not a costume designer's invention from scratch. It was Gordon saying, "This is how a man who has mastered his world moves through it, and this is how he looks while doing it." Gordon had poured his own sense of style into John Shaft, creating a character audiences couldn't stop watching. Then the box office numbers arrived, and they changed everything. So how did MGM respond to a success that exceeded every expectation? Number 2. The demand nobody was ready for. When the $13 million landed and the studio stopped hyperventilating, the response from MGM was predictable. More. Shaft's big score went into production almost immediately, with a budget of nearly $2 million, almost double the original, and a release date of June 1972, barely a year after the first film. Gordon later recalled in his memoir that despite a feeling of having already done this, the studio's offer of a significantly bigger budget was tempting enough to overcome his reservations. He signed on.
Shaft's big score was a competent film that made $10 million. Isaac Hayes did not return to score it. Gordon composed the music himself, and the loss of Isaac's sonic identity was felt, even if Gordon was a capable composer in his own right. The sequel was praised by critics, including
Roger Ebert, but never captured the cultural lightning of the original. It was the inevitable experience of trying to bottle something that had worked precisely because it was new. The lesson that Hollywood has never quite learned from Shaft is that the film worked not because of its formula, but because of the specific convergence of a director, an actor, a musician, and a specific cultural moment that needed exactly this film at exactly this time. Those elements cannot be reproduced by throwing more money at the same characters. But studios have been trying to reproduce them ever since, with varying results. Hollywood spent years chasing another Shaft. The United States government chose a different approach. It decided the original should never be lost. So how did a film that almost wasn't made become part of America's permanent cultural legacy. Number 1. The Eternal Preservation. In 2000, the United States Library of Congress selected Shaft for preservation in the National Film Registry, determining it to be culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. The film that MGM had greenlighted because they were desperate for revenue, made on a budget so tight that the director had to fight the studio for the right to film in the correct city, starring a man who had been driving a cab 6 months earlier, with a theme song written in 20 minutes. That film is now preserved by the United States government as part of the permanent National Cultural Record. The case for its cultural significance is not complicated to make. It was the first major Hollywood film that would give a black man the kind of heroic action lead that white actors had been occupying for the entirety of cinema history. It made that lead powerful, sexually confident, and answerable to no one, the qualities that Hollywood had systematically denied to black characters on screen for centuries. It proved that black audiences were a commercially significant market and that the industry had been leaving money on the table by ignoring them. It launched a wave of black filmmaking, however imperfectly, that gave opportunity to black directors, actors, and composers who would otherwise have had none. And it gave the world Isaac Hayes' theme, which remains one of the most immediately recognizable pieces of music in popular culture more than half a century after it was recorded. The man who walked down 42nd Street in 1971 and gave that cab driver the finger has been given something back. His walk is preserved. His music plays forever. And in the lobby of whatever afterlife exists for films, Gordon Parks is standing next to Richard Roundtree and Isaac Hayes, and they all look extremely cool. Which Shaft fact surprised you the most? And do you think the film still deserves its legendary status more than 50 years later? And if Gordon Parks hadn't insisted on making John Shaft a black character, do you think the film would still have become a Hollywood classic? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.